Rain didn't fall in Cedar Falls so much as it worked, a steady, methodical pressure that found every seam in concrete, every crack in rusted steel, every weak promise ever made in daylight. The industrial corridor on the south edge of the city was built for forgetting. Warehouses with boarded windows, chain-link fences stitched with barbed wire like scar tissue, sodium lights that buzzed in sickly halos and painted puddles the color of old coins. Even the air smelled like something the world had moved on from, oil, wet gravel, and the iron bite of machinery that hadn't been used in years but still refused to die. Officer Ethan Cole parked 2 blocks out and killed his lights. He sat in the dark for 3 breaths, not to build drama, to listen. You learned, if you lasted long enough in this job, that chaos had a rhythm. Most people couldn't hear it. They called it a feeling. Ethan called it information. There were voices ahead, muted, clipped, radios, a generator hum, and the faint periodic slap of something heavy against wet pavement like a metronome with a grudge. He checked the time. 1:17 a.m. He should have been home. He should have been asleep. He should have been doing what Captain Maria Hayes told him to do 2 hours ago. Let it go, Cole. Take the win you can take tonight, going home alive. But Ethan had gotten a call from Deputy Lucas Reed that didn't sound like Lucas. Lucas usually filled silence with life, not stupidity, life. A young man who still believed the world was mostly fixable if you just showed up early enough and tried hard enough. On the phone, Lucas had been quiet, controlled, almost whispering. "Sir," Lucas had said, "I'm at the old flood control access road by Harlow facility. There's a dog. There's a dog. There's a dog chained up. He's working with those private security guys." Ethan's hand had tightened on the steering wheel without him noticing. "What kind of dog?" he'd asked, keeping his voice level. "A German shepherd," Lucas said. "Older, limping, but not scared. Just still." Still? That word had landed in Ethan like a weight, because a truly scared dog panicked. A truly broken dog shut down. But a trained dog, one that had been shaped into steadiness under pressure, could look still and be screaming inside. Ethan stepped out into the rain. Cold threaded itself under his collar and along the back of his neck like a warning. He pulled his jacket tighter and started walking. He didn't announce himself, didn't call in with fanfare. The last 6 months had taught him that you could do everything right and still end up with your own department treating you like a problem that needed to be managed. Tonight wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing. As he moved closer, the corridor opened into a fenced service yard behind the municipal facility. Harlow Flood Control, a place nobody thought about until the river rose and someone needed a hero. A gate stood open, not forced, allowed. 2 SUVs were parked inside, engines idling. Men in dark rain gear moved in practiced loops between a flatbed truck and a loading bay. Their posture wasn't casual. It wasn't even aggressive. It was professional. And that's what made Ethan's stomach tighten. Private contractors were supposed to be support, supposed to be supplemental. But these men moved like they didn't answer to anyone in the city. A handheld floodlight swept across the yard. Ethan slid behind a dumpster, waiting for it to pass. Then he saw the dog. A German shepherd sat under a skeletal awning near the loading bay. A chain ran from his harness to a steel post. His coat was darker than the night, wet and clinging, but Ethan could make out the gray along the muzzle and the slight tremor in one hind leg. The dog's head was up, eyes forward, ears tuned toward the men like he was waiting for a command. The dog didn't whine, didn't bark, didn't pull. He was calm, and something in Ethan's chest went sharp and immediate, like a door being kicked open in a room he'd kept locked for too long. Because Ethan knew that posture. He knew that kind of calm. It wasn't comfort. It was discipline. Shadow. Ethan didn't mean to say it out loud, but the name left him anyway, breath fogging in the rain. The dog's ears flicked. Just once. Small, precise. A fraction of a second later, the dog's head tilted barely toward Ethan's hiding spot. Not random, not curious, targeted. Ethan's world narrowed until the rain, the lights, the men, the whole rotten industrial corridor became background noise. There was only the dog. 3 years ago, Shadow had been retired from active service after a catastrophic bite incident that wasn't a bite incident, at least not the way the report read. 2 years ago, Shadow had been listed as rehomed. 1 year ago, the paperwork said unreachable contact. And for the last 6 months, Ethan had been trying to locate him without making noise because noise made enemies. Now Shadow sat chained in a municipal yard like a tool, like property, like a weapon someone else was aiming. Ethan didn't move yet. He counted. 6 men visible, 2 more silhouettes by the loading bay door, cameras on the fence line, 4 that he could see. The kind of placement you used to record, not to deter. A performance. Lucas was somewhere nearby. Ethan caught a glimpse of him behind a utility box, shoulders tense, eyes wide with the kind of fear you only got when you realized you'd stumbled into something bigger than you. Ethan raised 2 fingers. Stay. A man in a hooded jacket approached Shadow with a clipboard, like this was an inspection. He spoke, voice low, and Shadow shifted his weight forward, careful of the bad leg, then froze again. The man gestured at the loading bay. A sealed crate sat on a dolly. Bright orange label. Hazard markings. The dog's nostrils flared. Ethan felt his skin go cold. Because he knew what dogs like Shadow were trained to do. Not tricks, not obedience, not cute little rituals for families in backyards. Detection, threat recognition. The ability to find what humans couldn't in places humans didn't want to admit existed. And someone had brought Shadow here for that. Ethan took one more breath. Calm wasn't a mood for him. It was a switch. He stepped out from cover. "Police!" Ethan called, voice steady, neither aggressive nor apologetic. "Who's in charge here?" Every head turned. The yard went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when the wrong person walks in. The man with the clipboard straightened. 2 others shifted subtly, feet widening, shoulders angling, readying for confrontation without looking like they were readying for confrontation. A tall contractor stepped forward. His rain jacket had a patch on the sleeve, some security firm name Ethan didn't recognize. His face was hard in a bored way, as if he'd spent his whole life being confident nobody could touch him. "Facilities under contracted security," the man said. "This is a restricted zone." Ethan held up his badge without stepping closer. "Then you'll love this. I'm law enforcement. I'm here because there's a K9 chained in your yard at 1 in the morning. The man's gaze flicked to Shadow, then back to Ethan like the dog was an inconvenient detail. "That animal is part of our operational support," the contractor said. "We have authorization." "From who?" A pause, half a beat too long. "City administration," the contractor replied. Ethan nodded slowly, like he accepted the answer. He didn't. He filed it. "Unchain him," Ethan said. "Now." The contractor smiled. It didn't carry warmth. It carried warning. "You don't get to give orders here," he said. Ethan's eyes stayed on the man's face, but his awareness stayed on everything else. Hands near pockets, a radio lifted slightly, the angle of bodies forming a subtle crescent behind their spokesman. They were building a shape around him. A containment. A trap. And then Shadow did something small. His tail moved once, low and restrained. Not excitement, recognition. Ethan took 1 step forward, just one, enough to make his intent clear. "Dog's name is Shadow," Ethan said softly, letting the words hang. "And he's mine." The contractor's eyes narrowed. "That's a hell of a claim." "It's not a claim," Ethan said. "It's a fact." He watched the contractor calculate. If this was random, they'd laugh him off, wave a piece of paper, and threaten a complaint. But the way that man's jaw tightened told Ethan something important. Shadow wasn't supposed to be recognized, which meant Shadow wasn't supposed to be here. Ethan turned his head slightly, keeping the contractors in his peripheral, and spoke toward Lucas without looking at him. "Deputy Reed," he said, voice carrying. "Call it in. Request Captain Hayes." Lucas hesitated. Ethan heard it in the silence. The rookie's fear of making this official, of pulling senior leadership into something that might blow back. Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't soften it either. "Now," Lucas swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." The contractor's smile faltered. "You're making a mistake," the man said. Ethan nodded once. "Maybe, but it won't be the first one I've survived." The contractor lifted a hand slightly, a signal. 2 men behind him shifted. Ethan saw it coming, a fraction of a second before it happened. One man stepping wide to cut off Ethan's retreat, another moving toward Shadow like he meant to relocate the dog before police leadership arrived. "Stop," Ethan said, voice quiet but sharp. The man heading toward Shadow didn't stop. Ethan moved, not a lunge, not a dramatic rush, a clean, controlled intercept. He stepped into the man's path and caught his wrist mid-reach, firm enough to halt, not enough to injure. The contractor's eyes lit up, like Ethan had just given him a gift. "Assault," the contractor said immediately, too fast, too ready. "You touched my employee." Ethan released the wrist and stepped back, palms open. "No," he said, "I prevented your employee from taking my K9. The contractor's radio crackled. The floodlight swung, catching Ethan full in the chest, blinding him for a heartbeat. That floodlight wasn't accidental. It was stage lighting. Ethan's gaze cut to the fence cameras, recording, capturing, building a story. He forced his shoulders to loosen. If they wanted him to look unstable, he would give them the opposite. He turned away from the contractor and walked straight to Shadow. Every instinct screamed that someone might hit him from behind. Ethan trusted his read. They didn't want a brawl. They wanted footage. He stopped 3 feet from Shadow. The dog's eyes locked onto his. So much lived in that look. Time, abandonment, endurance, the quiet stubbornness of a creature who had learned to wait for the right person. Ethan crouched slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Hey," he whispered, "it's me." Shadow didn't whine, didn't leap. He leaned forward until his forehead touched Ethan's, gentle pressure, a private language. Ethan's throat tightened. He hadn't realized how long he'd been holding this loss. "Easy," Ethan murmured, and reached for the chain. A hand clamped onto Ethan's shoulder, hard. Ethan didn't flinch. He rotated his torso, breaking the grip with a simple turn, and found himself face to face with the contractor. "You don't unchain him," the contractor said, "not unless you want to be the one who explains why a police officer interfered with city security operations." Ethan's smile was thin. "Then we'll explain it together." And that's when Captain Maria Hayes's voice rang out from the gate. "Back away from my officer!" Ethan didn't turn. He didn't need to. He heard the shape of authority in her tone, pragmatic, tired of games, empathetic only to those who deserved it. Maria entered with 2 patrol officers behind her and Lucas at her side, looking like he'd just run through every bad outcome a rookie brain could imagine. Captain Hayes took in the scene in one sweep: contractors, cameras, chained dog, hazardous crate. Her gaze landed on Shadow. Something flickered in her face, recognition not of the dog, but of what the dog represented. A line crossed. "Who authorized this?" Maria asked. The contractor straightened, stepping into his practiced confidence. "Captain, we have city authorization." "I didn't ask who you claim," Maria cut in. "I asked who authorized this." The contractor's jaw flexed. He glanced at the cameras, then at Ethan, like he was marking him. "You're overstepping," the contractor said. Maria stepped closer, stopping exactly where she could be heard by every camera without raising her voice. "And you're chaining a retired police K9 in a restricted municipal yard at 1 a.m. with hazardous material in view. That's not an overstep. That's a red flag." Ethan watched Shadow, the dog's ears angled toward Maria. Trust, cautious but real. Maria turned slightly, addressing Ethan without taking her eyes off the contractor. "Cole, is that Shadow?" "Yes," Ethan said. His voice didn't shake. "It's him." Maria exhaled through her nose, the kind of restrained anger that didn't make noise, but made decisions. "Unchain him," she said. The contractor's smile returned, sharper now. "Captain, I strongly advise against—" Maria's gaze hardened. "That wasn't advice I requested." One of Maria's patrol officers stepped forward to unclip the chain. The contractor raised his phone. Ethan caught the movement and knew exactly what it was, the call that would turn this from a standoff into a headline. Ethan didn't stop him, because a call was evidence too. Shadow rose slowly. His back leg trembled, but he stood anyway. Ethan felt the moment hit him, not like triumph, like responsibility. Shadow was back in his orbit, which meant whoever did this would come harder. Maria's radio crackled with an incoming call. She listened for half a second, then her eyes shifted, just slightly, toward Ethan. A warning without words. She lowered the radio. "Cole," she said, voice careful, "we're leaving, now." Ethan's hand slid to Shadow's harness. Shadow leaned into him. Together, they walked out of the yard under the gaze of cameras and contractors and a city that suddenly felt smaller than it should. Ethan didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel the story being written behind him. And he knew one thing with cold clarity. This wasn't about the dog, not anymore. Shadow didn't bark the entire drive back. He sat in the rear compartment of Ethan's cruiser, head high, despite the tremor in his hind leg, rainwater still threading off his coat in thin lines that darkened the rubber floor. Ethan drove in silence. Captain Maria Hayes followed behind in her unmarked sedan. Lucas was with her. Ethan could imagine the rookie replaying every second in his head. Who stepped first? Who spoke out of turn? Whether he'd just torched his own career by making that call. Ethan didn't blame him. Tonight had felt like stepping into a room where someone else already knew the ending. He pulled into the department's secured K9 bay instead of the public lot. The overhead lights buzzed to life as he opened the rear door. "Easy," he murmured. Shadow stepped down carefully. The limp was worse up close. Subtle, but there. Ethan crouched and ran both hands over Shadow's shoulders, ribs, hips, checking by instinct before protocol. The coat was thinner than it should have been, muscle reduced, scars layered over scars. And something else, a faint chemical tang beneath the wet fur. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Dr. Lena Moore arrived 20 minutes later, hair tied back, coat thrown over scrubs like she'd left something half-finished to be here. She didn't waste time with greetings. She knelt in front of Shadow, hands gentle but efficient, eyes moving with clinical precision. "Hi, beautiful," she murmured. Shadow watched her, then flicked his gaze to Ethan. Permission check. Ethan gave a small nod. Lena's brow furrowed as she examined the hind leg. "Chronic strain," she said quietly. "Exacerbated recently." She shifted to the shoulder. "And this, pressure bruising. Repetitive." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Working him?" he asked. "Not gently," Lena replied. She leaned closer to the coat, inhaled, then straightened. "Do you smell that?" Ethan nodded. "I did." She rubbed a sterile pad along the fur and held it up under the light. "Industrial accelerant residue," she said after a moment, "and something else. Nitrates, maybe." Ethan's pulse didn't spike. It dropped. "Explosives?" Lucas asked from the doorway, voice thinner than usual. Lena didn't answer immediately. She sealed the pad in a specimen bag. "I'm not saying explosives," she said carefully, "but I am saying Shadow has been around materials that aren't household." Maria stepped into the bay, closing the door behind her. "City Council member Harlow chairs infrastructure," she said, without preamble. "Harlow facility is under his oversight." Ethan didn't look up. And, Maria continued, Harlow pushed for expanded private security last quarter, budget override, said it was about protecting flood infrastructure from domestic threats. Lucas swallowed. "You think they're staging something?" Maria's gaze flicked to him. "I think we're looking at a performance." Ethan's hand stilled on Shadow's back. "Dogs like him don't get brought in unless someone needs credibility," Ethan said. "You bring in a trained detection K9, you make people feel safe. And if something is discovered," Lena added softly, "it looks heroic." Maria's expression hardened. "Cole," she said, voice lowering, "Internal Affairs called while we were in the yard." Ethan finally looked up. "They have footage," she continued, "edited. You intercepting an employee. Aggressive posture. They're labeling it excessive contact." Lucas's face went pale. "That's insane." "It's strategic," Maria corrected. "They want you unstable. They want to frame this as a personal vendetta over a retired dog." Ethan nodded once. "I expected that." Maria studied him for a long moment. "You're being temporarily reassigned pending review," she said. "Effective immediately." Silence settled in the bay. Lucas's mouth opened, closed. "Ma'am," he started. Maria lifted a hand. "It's optics, Reed, and it buys us time." Ethan rose slowly to his feet. "You're not cutting me loose," he said, not a question. Maria met his gaze evenly. "I'm not letting you be the headline," she replied. "A beat. You work unofficially," she continued, quietly, "through me." Ethan's jaw flexed. "And Shadow?" he asked. Maria's voice softened by a fraction. "Shadow stays under veterinary supervision. No paperwork leaves this room without my signature." Lena sealed the specimen bag and straightened. "I'll run independent analysis," she said. "Off department grid." Lucas looked between them, realization dawning. "We're bypassing local channels," he said. Maria's mouth twitched faintly. "We're preserving integrity." Ethan crouched once more in front of Shadow. The dog's eyes were steady. No panic, no confusion, just awareness. "They're going to move fast," Ethan murmured to him. "So we move smarter." Shadow's tail tapped the concrete once. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He drove home in his dented pickup and found himself checking the rearview mirror more than usual. Twice he circled his own block before parking. He told himself it was paranoia. Then he saw the SUV. Black, idling. Windows too dark for the neighborhood. Lucas's stomach tightened. He parked anyway. Stepped out. Closed his door. The SUV's headlights flicked off. A door opened. A man stepped out, mid-30s, clean beard, jacket with no markings. "Deputy Reed?" the man called lightly. Lucas's training kicked in. He kept distance. "Yes." The man smiled like they were old friends. "Just wanted to introduce myself," he said. "You've been poking around at Harlow." Lucas didn't answer. The man tilted his head. "You're young," he said conversationally. "Career ahead of you. No need to tie it to a washed-up K-9 dispute." Lucas felt heat rise in his chest. "Shadow's a decorated working dog," he said before he could stop himself. The man's smile sharpened. "Exactly," he replied. "Decorated, past tense." A pause. "You keep digging," the man added. "You might find something that digs back." Lucas held his ground. "I'll take that as a threat," he said. The man shrugged. "Take it however you want." He got back into the SUV. It rolled away without hurry. Lucas stood in the dark for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed Ethan. "They're watching," he said when Ethan answered. Ethan's voice was steady. "I know," he replied. By morning, the city was humming. Local news ran a short segment about infrastructure security exercises. Harlow himself appeared briefly on camera, praising private-public partnerships for keeping citizens safe. Shadow's image wasn't in the footage, but Ethan saw something else. A still frame, just a second long, of the loading bay crate. The same hazard label he'd seen. And behind it, a contractor adjusting something near the tunnel entrance. Ethan paused the screen, zoomed in. Lucas leaned over his shoulder. "Is that?" Lucas started. "Pressure switch housing," Ethan finished. Lucas blinked. "You're kidding." Ethan didn't answer, because he wasn't. The flood control tunnel ran beneath half the city. It was scheduled for a public safety demonstration in 2 days. Mayor, council, press. A live display of the new rapid response security team. Ethan felt the pattern settle into place like a lock clicking shut. "They're going to stage a discovery," he said. Maria stood by the window of her office, blinds half drawn. "And if they don't?" she asked. "Then we're paranoid," Ethan replied. "But if they do—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Maria turned. "You don't have badge authority at the event," she said. "Officially." "Unofficially?" Ethan asked. She held his gaze. "You observe," she said. "You don't engage unless lives are in danger." Ethan nodded. "And if Shadow alerts?" he asked. Maria's jaw tightened. "Then you do what you've always done," she replied. "You trust him." Lena worked through the night. By noon she had results. "Trace nitrates confirmed," she said over speakerphone. "Residue consistent with commercial explosive compounds." Lucas swore under his breath. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "They're not just staging," he said. "They're planting." Maria's voice was steel. "Then we make sure they don't control the narrative." The day of the event dawned clear, too clear. The flood control tunnel entrance was dressed like a parade route, banners, podium, media vans lining the perimeter. Ethan stood back in plain clothes, cap low, Shadow at his side in a simple harness, not department issued. Shadow's gait was careful but steady. The contractors were already in place. Ethan counted them. 8 visible, 2 near the tunnel mouth, 1 near the control panel. Harlow himself stood near the podium, smiling for cameras. Maria lingered near the media cluster, posture neutral but eyes sharp. Lucas hovered near a portable equipment case, trying to look like he belonged. The demonstration began. Speeches, applause. Then the lead contractor stepped forward dramatically. As part of today's drill, he announced, our K9 unit will sweep the lower tunnel to demonstrate detection capabilities. Ethan's jaw tightened. They'd brought another dog, younger, sleeker, flashier. Shadow's ears flicked. The contractor handler led the younger dog toward the tunnel. Ethan didn't move, not yet. The younger dog walked the perimeter, sniffed, paused, then, right on cue, sat beside a drainage grate. Gasps from the crowd. Cameras zoomed. The contractor beamed. As you can see. Shadow's body went rigid, not reactive, not confused. Alert. Ethan felt it before he saw it. Shadow's head turned, not toward the staged grate, but slightly left, toward a maintenance hatch half hidden behind a stack of sandbags, a place the younger dog had passed without interest. Shadow's nostrils flared. His breathing shifted. Ethan didn't speak. He let the leash slacken. Shadow took 2 slow steps forward, stopped, sat, directly facing the maintenance hatch. Not dramatic, precise. Ethan's voice cut through the air. Clear the area, he said. The contractor laughed. That dog isn't part of— Clear it, Ethan repeated, louder. Maria moved instantly. Everyone back, she ordered. Now! Lucas stepped between the crowd and the tunnel entrance. Confusion rippled. The contractor handler tried to pull the younger dog back into focus. Shadow didn't look away. Ethan approached the hatch slowly. The contractor stepped into his path. You're out of line, he hissed. Ethan's eyes were calm. Move. For a split second, the contractor hesitated, and that was all Ethan needed. He stepped past him and knelt at the hatch. His fingers found the edge, lifted. Inside, wired carefully along the tunnel support beam, sat a compact device, shielded, concealed, live. Not large enough to destroy the tunnel, large enough to injure, to frighten, to justify expanded security budgets. The world went silent around him, then erupted. Maria barked orders. Lucas called for state bomb disposal. The crowd recoiled. Cameras pivoted wildly. Ethan stood slowly. Shadow remained seated, eyes locked on the device. You planted this, Ethan said quietly to the contractor. The man's face had gone pale. I don't know what that is, he snapped. But the microphones caught everything, and the younger dog, the staged hero, whined nervously, confused by the shift. Within minutes, state units arrived. Not local, not city-controlled, state. The device was disarmed live on air. Reporters swarmed. Harlow's face drained of color. The contractor tried to step back into the narrative to claim confusion, sabotage, but it was too late. The cameras had already seen Shadow sit first. They had already seen Ethan open the hatch. Truth didn't need spin, it needed visibility. That night, the contractor's offices were raided, documents seized, emails pulled, payments traced. The private security firm had been staging minor threats for months, each one conveniently discovered, each one boosting contracts. And the nitrates on Shadow's coat? From repeated exposure, forced proximity to planted devices, used like a prop. Ethan sat beside Shadow in Lena's clinic as the news rolled. Lucas leaned against the wall, stunned. Maria stood near the door, phone pressed to her ear, coordinating with state investigators. Lena adjusted Shadow's bandage. He did it again, she murmured softly. Ethan's hand rested on Shadow's neck. He never stopped, he replied. Shadow looked up at him, eyes steady, unbroken, and Ethan understood something in that moment. They had tried to erase him, to repurpose him, to turn a warrior into a marketing tool. But Shadow had done what he had always done. He had chosen the real threat and waited for the right person to act. Ethan bent close, forehead to fur. We're not done, he whispered. Shadow's tail moved once, not tired, not triumphant, ready. The first time Ethan realized they were trying to pull him back under, really pull, wasn't with a gun or a threat or a squad car in his driveway. It was paperwork. A neat, sterile envelope slid across Captain Maria Hayes's desk with Ethan's name typed in the center like a verdict. Maria didn't hand it to him right away. She held it for a moment, eyes narrowed, as if she could read the intent through the paper. This came from City Council, she said finally. Ethan sat across from her, posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. About what? He asked. Maria exhaled. A notice of administrative concern over your conduct at the tunnel event. Ethan's mouth twitched faintly. We stopped a bomb. They're calling it an unverified device discovered during a drill, Maria replied, voice edged with disgust. They're claiming you disrupted an authorized security demonstration and endangered civilians by causing panic. Lucas, sitting against the wall with a legal pad and too much caffeine, blurted, "That's insane. There were cameras. There's a state report." Maria looked at him. "That's why it's a major turn, Reed. When the facts are against them, they try to win by exhausting you." Ethan took the envelope at last, opened it, scanned the language. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened at the bottom edge. "They're not trying to punish me," he said quietly. "They're trying to isolate me." Maria didn't argue. She didn't have to. Ethan stood and paced once, 2 steps, turn, 2 steps back, like he was mapping a room that wasn't visible. "They can't control the story anymore," he said, voice low. "So they'll try to control the messenger." Lena, leaning in the doorway with her arms crossed, nodded toward Shadow in the corner. "And the dog?" she asked. Ethan's gaze flicked to Shadow. Shadow lay on a padded mat, eyes half closed, but ears tuned to every shift of conversation. He hadn't slept much since the tunnel. Ethan could tell by the way the dog's breathing stayed too ready. "They'll come for him again," Ethan said. Lucas swallowed. "After what happened on live TV?" Ethan's eyes were calm. "Especially after." Maria's phone rang. She answered, listened. Her face hardened. When she hung up, she looked at Ethan. "Shadow's custody status just got challenged," she said. "City Council claims the department doesn't have legal right to keep him. They're citing the old retirement paperwork. Rehomed, unreachable. You know the drill." Ethan's jaw flexed. Lena stepped forward. "I have medical evidence he's been abused and coerced into hazardous exposure." Maria spread her hands. "City Council doesn't care about medical evidence. They care about control." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded once. "Then we stopped playing defense," he said. Lucas leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Ethan's gaze moved from Maria to Lena to Lucas, then back to Shadow. "It means we build a chain they can't break," he said. "Not locally, not politically, jurisdictional." Maria's voice softened by a fraction. "Federal." Ethan nodded. Lena frowned. "We have enough?" Ethan held up the envelope. "This is enough to show retaliation," he said. "But we need motive and mechanism. Money, contracts, the firm's relationship to city officials." Lucas flipped open his legal pad like it was a shield. "I can get procurement records." Maria's eyes sharpened. "Careful." Lucas's voice steadied. "I'm careful. I'm also tired of being told to stay small." Ethan looked at him for a beat, then nodded. "Good," he said. "Stay smart, not loud." Lucas nodded hard. Maria stood. "I'll use my position while I still have it. I can request official copies of contract amendments." "And I'll run the chemical trail," Lena added. "Residue doesn't happen in a vacuum. It comes from storage, handling, distribution." Ethan crouched beside Shadow. The dog lifted his head. Ethan's hand slid under the harness strap, fingers finding the seam. There, stitched on the inner side, faint but readable in the right light. An inventory tag. Not police, not military. Private. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "They branded him," he murmured. Shadow's eyes met his. No shame, just patience. Ethan felt that familiar cold clarity settle over him. "Okay," he said softly. Then we traced the brand. The first real strike came that night. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet attempt to erase. Ethan stepped out of Lena's clinic into the parking lot at 11:46 p.m. The air was brittle with winter edge, the kind that made your breath visible and your thoughts sharper. His cruiser was parked under a street lamp. He noticed the shadow first. A thin, dark line under the driver's side door that hadn't been there earlier. Ethan didn't rush. He stopped 3 feet away, body angled slightly, eyes scanning reflections in nearby windows. No movement, no footsteps. He crouched, fingers brushing the ground. Oil, fresh. He looked at the undercarriage, a small device, magnetic, attached near the frame. Tracker, not even subtle, a message. Ethan's mouth went flat. Lucas's truck pulled in behind him. "Sir?" Lucas called softly. Ethan pointed without looking. "Don't get out. Call Captain." Lucas froze, then nodded and dialed. Ethan stepped back, pulled his phone, and snapped photos from multiple angles. Evidence. Always evidence. Lena appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowing at Ethan's posture. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer. He reached into his bag, pulled out gloves, and removed the tracker carefully, placing it in a sealed evidence pouch. He held it up under the street lamp. "Someone wants me to know they can follow me," he said calmly. Lena's voice was tight. "Or someone wants you to think that." Ethan looked at her. Both. Maria arrived 15 minutes later. She took one look at the tracker and exhaled through her nose. "This is escalating," she said. Ethan nodded. "Good." Lucas stared. "Good?" Ethan's gaze was steady. "Escalation creates mistakes. Mistakes create proof." Maria's eyes held his. "And proof creates leverage." Ethan smiled faintly. "Exactly." Morning brought the kind of sunlight that made people believe in clean endings. But Ethan had learned something about light. It didn't erase darkness. It just made it easier to see. The city called an emergency press briefing at noon, Harlow himself flanked by two serious-looking men in suits and one contractor spokesperson with the same dead confidence as the night in the yard. They stood at the steps of City Hall like they owned the air. Maria watched the live stream from her office. Ethan stood behind her, arms crossed, Shadow at his side. Lucas hovered near the door, restless. Lena had come too, hair still damp from a rushed shower, eyes too sharp for someone who'd slept. Harlow spoke into the microphone. "Yesterday's incident," he said, "was a misunderstanding caused by unauthorized interference." Ethan's jaw tightened. Harlow continued. "Our contracted security team discovered a suspicious device during a scheduled drill, and due to the actions of Officer Ethan Cole, who is currently under review, public safety protocols were compromised." Maria's knuckles whitened on her desk. Then the contractor spokesperson stepped forward. "We respect law enforcement," the man said smoothly, "but we cannot allow unstable individuals to jeopardize critical infrastructure." Unstable? Ethan's eyes narrowed. Harlow's lips curved faintly as if he'd just said something he'd been waiting to say for a long time. Maria shut off the stream. Silence settled. Lucas finally spoke. "They're painting you as the problem," he said, voice rough. Ethan nodded once. "I know." Lena's voice was calm but cold. "They're laying groundwork to take Shadow." Maria looked at Ethan. "And to remove me." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Then we finish it today." Maria's eyes sharpened. "How?" Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Inside, procurement records Lucas had obtained through a back channel, contract amendments Maria had pulled before City Council could lock them down, and Lena's chemical chain analysis showing residue links to a storage unit leased by the security firm. A clean trail, money to mechanism. And then the most important piece. Photos of the tracker device, serial numbers visible. Lena had matched the serial number to a batch purchased by the same private firm. They hadn't just followed Ethan, they'd used company equipment, corporate fingerprints. Ethan slid the folder across Maria's desk. "This goes to state investigators," he said. "And federal." Maria's brow furrowed. "We need jurisdiction." Ethan nodded toward Shadow. "We already have it," he said. Maria frowned. "How?" Ethan's voice dropped. "They planted a device in a municipal tunnel. They used a coerced K-9 to legitimize it. They attempted to track a police officer investigating it. That's obstruction, misuse of public funds, potential domestic terror staging, and interstate procurement fraud if the materials crossed state lines." Lena's eyes widened slightly. "That's federal." Ethan nodded, "which means Harlow's backyard is no longer his." They met the state investigative team at 2 p.m. in a plain office that smelled like coffee and fluorescent resignation. No city logos, no local politics. Just two investigators with tired eyes and the kind of calm that came from seeing powerful men fall before. Maria laid the evidence out on the table. Ethan stayed back, letting her lead. Shadow lay at Ethan's feet, head up, eyes scanning. The lead investigator, a woman with silver-streaked hair, looked at Shadow. "That him?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She studied the dog for a moment, then looked back at the evidence. "This is strong," she said slowly. "If it holds, this isn't just corruption. This is orchestration." Maria's jaw tightened. "It is." The investigator's gaze sharpened. "And you're telling me they're trying to spin the narrative publicly?" Ethan spoke for the first time in the meeting. "They are," he said, because they think the public will forget details. The investigator nodded. Public memory is short, she agreed. Ethan's eyes held hers. Then we make the moment impossible to forget. The opportunity arrived faster than Ethan expected. At 4:18 p.m., Lucas received a text from an unknown number. "Stay out of this or the dog gets put down." Lucas's face went white. He showed Ethan. Ethan stared at the message for 2 seconds. Then he nodded. "They're scared," he said. Lucas's voice shook. "Sir, they're threatening Shadow." Ethan's hand rested briefly on Shadow's shoulder. "Shadow has survived worse," he said, "but we don't test that." Maria's eyes were hard. "Where did the text come from?" Lucas pulled up the number. Lena leaned in. "That's not a burner, that's a registered line." Ethan's mouth went flat. "They're sloppy," he murmured. "Good." He looked at Maria. "They want to push us into panic," he said, "so we do the opposite." Maria nodded. Ethan turned to the investigator. "Do you have someone who can trace this?" he asked. The investigator nodded once. "Already working." Ethan exhaled. Then his phone rang. Unknown caller. Ethan looked at the screen like it was a chess move. Maria's gaze locked on him. "Answer," she said quietly. "On speaker." Ethan tapped accept. A smooth voice slid through the speaker, polished and entitled. "Officer Cole," it said. "You've caused quite a scene." Ethan's face didn't change. "Councilman Harlow," he replied. A pause, surprised that Ethan knew. Harlow recovered quickly. "You've always been sharp," he said. "It's unfortunate you used that sharpness to cut your own future." Ethan's voice was calm. "I'm listening," he said. Harlow chuckled. "Good, because I'm offering you a way out." Ethan stayed silent. Harlow continued. "You walk away. You stop feeding rumors to state suits and board doctors, and I'll make sure you keep your pension, keep your job, keep your little hero image." Lucas clenched his jaw. Maria's eyes were ice. Ethan's tone remained even. "And Shadow?" he asked. Harlow's voice softened, the way men softened when they thought softness was power. "The dog is complicated," he said. "Accidents happen. Medical decisions get made." A cold thread ran through Ethan. He let it show nowhere. "That sounds like a threat," Ethan said. Harlow laughed lightly. No, it's reality. You've seen enough to know the world isn't fair." Ethan's gaze flicked to the investigator, who was recording. He spoke slowly. "Councilman," Ethan said, "are you telling me you can influence the medical status and ownership of a retired K-9 to punish an investigation?" Silence. Then Harlow's voice tightened. "You're twisting my words," he snapped. Ethan's voice was almost gentle. "I'm clarifying them," he said, "because this call is being recorded." A sharp inhale on the line. "What?" Harlow's tone shifted. Anger now. "You can't—" Ethan cut him off. "I can," he said, "and you just did." The line went dead. Lucas let out a breath he'd been holding. Maria looked at Ethan, eyes bright with restrained fury and admiration. "That was clean," she said. Ethan didn't smile. "It wasn't for me," he replied, eyes on Shadow. "It's for him." By 6:30 p.m., the state investigators had enough to move. Warrants were drafted, phones traced. The private security firm's storage unit was raided. Inside, more residue, documentation, and, most damning, an internal memo detailing public demonstration outcomes tied to contract increases. Proof of intent. The city's spin collapsed. Because spin couldn't survive paper. At 8:10 p.m., agents arrived at the security firm's office. At 8:22, they arrived at Harlow's office. At 8:40, Harlow was led out past cameras, no longer the man on the podium, but the man in cuffs. The city didn't roar. It exhaled, like it had been holding its breath for years without knowing why. The next morning, the department's hallways felt different. Not cleaner, not kinder, but quieter. Corruption made noise when it was comfortable. When it was exposed, it went silent. Maria stood at the podium in the briefing room, flanked by the state investigator and a federal agent in a suit that didn't wrinkle. Ethan sat in the back row with Shadow at his feet. Lucas sat beside him, posture straight, eyes tired but clear. Lena stood near the side wall, arms crossed. Maria spoke. "Due to ongoing investigations," she said, "the department will cooperate fully with state and federal oversight. Officer Ethan Cole is cleared of misconduct related to the tunnel incident. Any attempts to retaliate against officers or civilians involved will be prosecuted. Reporters shouted questions. Maria didn't flinch. The federal agent stepped forward. "This case involves misuse of public funds, obstruction, and staged threats," he said. "We will pursue charges accordingly." Ethan watched the room, watched the faces. Some looked relieved, some looked angry, some looked afraid. He wasn't here to watch people feel better. He was here to make sure it didn't happen again. Shadow's legal status was resolved in a single afternoon. The federal agent himself signed the paperwork that transferred Shadow into Ethan's permanent custody under protective order. Lena examined the final documents like she didn't trust paper even now. "They can't touch him," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. He crouched beside Shadow. "Home," he murmured. Shadow leaned into him, a silent, steady weight. Weeks passed. The city council was reshuffled. Procurement rules were rewritten. The private security contract system was gutted. Not because the city suddenly became virtuous, because the city became watched. And watched cities behaved. Maria called Ethan into her office one evening as sunlight fell in long, tired bars across the floor. "You know what they're calling it?" she asked. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Shadow's alert," Maria said. "The moment that turned the whole thing." Ethan's mouth twitched faintly. "He didn't do it for a headline." "No," Maria agreed. "He did it because that's who he is." She leaned back, studying Ethan. "You changed too," she said. Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked down at Shadow lying by the door. The dog's eyes were closed, but his ears still tracked the room. "I didn't change," Ethan said finally. "I remembered." Maria slid a folder across her desk. A proposal, a program, retired K-9 safeguarding, mandatory tracking of rehomed working dogs, funding for post-service medical care, and, most important, legal protections preventing private entities from commandeering retired K-9s. Lena had contributed the medical framework. Lucas had contributed policy research like he'd been born for it. Maria had pulled it together with the kind of leadership that didn't need applause. Ethan stared at the folder. "You want me to lead this?" he said. Maria's eyes held his. "You and Shadow," she replied. "Together." Ethan exhaled. He didn't look at Maria. He looked at Shadow. Shadow opened his eyes and met Ethan's gaze like he'd been waiting for the question. Ethan nodded once. "Yes," he said. 3 months later, a cold wind ran across a field outside Cedar Falls, where a new facility stood with fresh paint and a quiet purpose. Not a monument, a working place. A sanctuary-adjacent training and medical center for retired K-9ES and the officers who had nowhere to put the grief that came after service. It wasn't huge, not yet, but it was real. Ethan walked the perimeter with Shadow at his side. Lucas jogged behind them carrying a clipboard and too much enthusiasm. "Sir," Lucas called, breathless, "we got our first 2 intakes arriving next week. One's a Malinois retired from narcotics, the other's a shepherd from search and rescue." Ethan nodded. "Be ready." Lucas grinned. "Always." Lena stood near the entrance with a medical kit, watching the sky like she could read weather patterns in the clouds. Maria parked her car and stepped out, coat pulled tight, eyes scanning the grounds. "You did it," she said to Ethan. Ethan didn't smile. He watched Shadow. Shadow stood with his head high, wind moving the fur along his neck, eyes alert but peaceful. "We did it," Ethan corrected quietly. A reporter approached, careful, respectful, keeping distance. "Officer Cole," she asked, "why fight this hard for a dog?" Ethan looked at her, then down at Shadow, then out at the new facility where more dogs would come, dogs who had served and would not be forgotten. His voice was calm. "Because he fought for strangers who never knew his name," Ethan said. "So now we make sure his name, and every name like his, doesn't disappear when the uniforms come off." Shadow's tail moved once, quiet, certain. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something he didn't trust at first. Not victory, not relief, purpose. A reason that didn't end at the end of a shift. He rested his hand on Shadow's harness. "Let's go," he murmured. Shadow stepped forward. Together they walked into the wind, 2 silhouettes against a city that had learned painfully that truth could still win when someone refused to look away.